Brendan Harper is my name. I'm the coaching officer at Tyrone County Board, and asked to introduce this workshop for you. And I have the pleasure of introducing Jim Lowther from the University of Ulster, Jordanstown, where he works in sports development. Jim has spent over 20 years with football academies in Britain, and he's going to share with us his experience of that. And I know any of you have been involved with development squads and academies. We'll find what Jim has to say, something we can compare and learn from other sports. And I had an opportunity of bumping into Jim actually in Jordanstown last week, and we're just talking a little about the sort of issues that arise for us in Gaelic games with development squads. So it's a great pleasure to hand over to Jim for this session. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks very much. I just moved to Ulster in the last year and a half. I started off in 1986. I'm from Mayo originally, and my first job after an insert, I spent a year working in primary school doing Gaelic games coaching, mainly Gaelic football and some camogie. And then from that, I went to England in 87 to do a sports science degree in Strawberry Hill in Twickenham. And within a year of graduating, I joined Wimbledon Football Club, and it was their first season in the Premier League. And I was the football and community officer. So I spent a lot of time doing what we call grassroots coaching programs, boys, girls, holiday camps, schools work, primary, secondary, coach education. And along the way then, I worked at the Centre of Excellence. That lad there is Dean Lewington, he's the captain of MK Dons. So he's with Wimbledon, whatever it's got, the franchise, the real club, since he was 8. I'm coaching when he was 8, yeah? And he's gone all the way through a system. The guy on the right was Nigel Rio Coker. One of my last jobs at the club, before it became MK Dons, I was the sports science coordinator, and I was responsible for first team sports science and youth team work, and I mainly looked after the sports psychology corner. So that was Nigel, so he was a youth team player at Wimbledon. And then I began to understand the issues he was facing as he moved through a youth setup. At Wimbledon, we were one of the first clubs in the London catchment at the time, set up a Girls' Centre of Excellence, so I was involved in that. Post-Wimbledon, I moved to Charlton as an academy coach part-time, and I was fortunate enough to see a lot of good players, work with Carl Jenkinson when he was about 11 and 12, John Joe Shelby coached him as well. And then at the same time, I decided to support a golfer who was an international youth golfer. So when I first met him, he was a county golfer, and then he got into England's Golf Centre of Excellence and worked through all those youth tournaments. So again, you see an insight into what might go wrong. The one on the right, Surbiton Hockey Club, near where I lived in London. They were the top end of the elite game in England at club level. We had something like 17 or 18 international players in our club setup, between Scotland, Wales and England. And we also had a German Olympic gold medal winner. And it was an interesting workplace to work on a part-time basis, was because I had players coming through into that club environment who were now mixing it with international players in the club front, so it's like breaking into inter-county sport, yeah? And then at the same time I had fellas that I worked with getting ready for the Olympics, and they were going to come out of the game and give up international hockey. So, and all of that was happening in a club environment. So the last 3 or 4 years I worked at Crystal Palace as a player development advisor in a part-time capacity. Initially I looked at match analysis and sports psychology, and then as time went on, obviously I focused more on sports psychology and player feedback and systems. And you know, we've got everybody there from Victor Moses, Zaha, John Williams, and Carl De Silva, who's going to be an excellent player. And since I moved to Northern Ireland, then I did some work for the IFA, helped out with sports psychology, the women's national team. And my final project I'm working on at the moment is Georgetown for Sigerset. So you're seeing a broad range from the grassroots to the elite end in different sports. There's some common themes here because it's all about helping the players develop, regardless of the level they're working on. So, just for a quick little survey for myself, do you mind just put up your hand if you work as a Centre of Excellence stroke academy coach in Gaelic games? That and all, just put your hand up so we can see what we've got, alright? Who works then at club level only? That's their main coaching focus. And is there anyone here in the room then that does lots of school coaching? Okay? So you can see the balance in the group. All right. Is there anyone here who does all three? Put their hand up. Yeah. So we've got another population in the Venn diagram who do a bit of everything. Yeah. So you're involved with elite players across 3 different areas. All right. So the thinking coach. This is the thinking coach's alphabet. Yeah. Can you see what's different with this? What's missing? And what other and what's in the way of R? W. What in coaching, what does the W stand for? Win or work. Yeah. And then you can see that RST, rest, is being put out of place. Little joke there on that. Yeah? So coaches may have work ahead of rest in their alphabet. You might have seen this through the Ulster GEA. This is the pyramids that we're working through. Fairly established, and Sean Boylan there, the main presentation, would talk about already some of the issues that are happening there, about the multiple commitments. And notice about it seems to be an onwards and upward process where people just seem to get better and better and shoot out the top. But what we really know about sport is not like that. It's not going to be a smooth pathway where you go from one squad onto the next and eventually get to the top end. So that gives you a picture of all the competing demands, say from a Gaelic football perspective with Sigerson in there. And then you got the top, then finally international rules as well. And then we can see all the different player pathways. So that's how it's working out, and that's what's happening. From your own experiences and to say looking abroad, what's the purpose of an academy or a centre of excellence? What do you think? What's the real purpose behind it?
Well, the best players together.
You want your best players together, yeah? Anything else?
Make them technically more proficient.
Technically more proficient, yes. Yeah? Now the question I'm going to ask, and we had to ask it at Crystal Palace, one of the things when I saw the introduction they gave to parents when the kid came in was, what type of player are you going to produce? What do you think might have been picked also at Palace might be looking at it?
Player that will graduate into your adult team, that will fit in easily into your adult team.
Mm-hmm. Good. Now, what would they have that makes them feed easily into the adult team?
Yes, they would develop the qualities that you want.
And what type of qualities? What's the usual traditionals people talk about, you just mentioned?
Skill.
Yeah. So their goal at one stage was to produce technically gifted individuals. Yes? And that was their goal as the academy. What's the flaw in that word in straight away?
Maybe just be as committed as the player, it's not just as skillful.
Okay, good. So we need to look a bit more beyond the technical. Yeah. What else? What's actually missing in the sentence? So, perfect. So we want technically good individuals who can play within a team. Does that make sense? Balotelli versus James Milner's, yeah? Gareth Barry's, etc. You know, and we've got our own Palace equivalent, Paddy McCarthy, the club captain, an Irish guy from Dublin, brilliant professional, all about the team, and so he can do his job as a defender. And it's the same with Zaha coming through, that he will still be able to function within a team and understand it. So, one of the things that needs to make it happen is a coaching philosophy, but it needs to move beyond the usual technical and tactical development, because those are the ones that everybody keep emphasising. But it's a more subtle process than that, because as I said, we mentioned some players there, and look at the contrasting behaviour in them. So, players, the end product of our system, what type of players are we going to produce? Technically brilliant individuals, at the same time they've got their weaknesses and they may not be at times the way you want them to be, on or off the pitch. So, another challenge we've sorted through at the academy coaches is, which is more important, the player or the person? What do you think? Person. Do you want to tell us?
The person's more important because if you have the right person and they'll have the right attitude, they'll they'll be able to work on the technical skills, and they'll also be able to work within the team.
So then they're going to be able to work with other people and move around. So if we really sort of buy into this idea that sports affects your attitude, your behaviours and so on, then we obviously want people who can work with other people, alright? And there's a transfer off into that in other environments. Is it player-centred or coach-centred academy? What do you think the implications are for us either in Gaelic or soccer?
Probably in academies, and it should be clear.
Yeah, because we'll come back to it, but I did the workshop for the IFA, and Mike Newell was in the audience. Now, Mike Newell used to play for Everton in the 80s or 90s, when they won the Premier League with Howard Wilkinson. Howard Kendall was manager, yeah? And he played for Blackburn as well, and he got a championship medal with Alan Shearer. And he started giving out, he says, these academy coaches, he says, all the more interested in themselves. They think they've got all the answers to everything. It's all about them, yeah? So, what have we got there? Why have we got an academy? Is it player-centred or coach-centred? And last year, the GA conference, you went to Crow Park. There was a really interesting man from Australia, David Parkin. Did anyone hear him speak last year? Yeah? And he gave me a great line to remember. He says, are they your players or are you their coach? What does that mean?
So you look at the team in terms of the management structure and the players, the relationship with them.
The relationship with them. So what are we on about this relationship?
Mutual respect for each other.
Yes, definitely. But what seems to be the issue that we might be having at the moment in at least Gaelic games?
The cult of the manager, maybe.
The cult of the manager, yeah. Or, at the end of the day, look, the players are like commodities, aren't they? Yeah? The county owns them, the school owns them, the club owns them, yeah? And at the end of the day, coaches, hey, we're there to work for the player. They're not some paid workforce. We're not Alex Ferguson and they're on 30, 40 grand a week and then you can find them for X, Y, and Z. Yeah? We're there to work with people. I suppose I'm slightly skeptic about elite sport because, you've been through 2 or 3 football clubs, you've seen hockey, you've seen golf, and then I've worked with Olympic athletes who've lost their funding because they've been injured. And all of a sudden you get to think in a different way about this whole business of elite sport. So we've now got a challenge that's probably happening all the time. Which is more important? The club, the school, or the county?
Club.
The club. Why would you say the club?
That's where it all begins.
Where it all begins, okay? Anyone else differ in opinion on that?
Does there have to be one? Can that work in harmony?
Thank you. Good man. And they're not working in harmony. Alright. This is where Jim gets a bit nasty now. I found this on the Ulster GA website in 2003. This was written. Managing talented young players in Ulster. Right? And it's a bit like deja vu, me turning up here today and talking about, the issue of managing players, because they highlighted a lot of important things going on. And fundamentally it was about communication, everybody having their role in the player. And at one stage I was talking to Eugene and Jimmy Dara before Christmas. We got talking and it was like, well, at this time of the year, say the secondary school kids are doing this. And this time of the year then they move on to something else and then they move on to something else. And a bit like what Joe Boyle was saying, the dilemma we've got at Georgetown. We had some league games before Christmas, yeah. Then all of a sudden we've got the McKenna Cup coming up. Whose turn is it now to work with the player? And then we've got Sigerson, and then off we go. But the same process has been played out with some kids in secondary school. Would you agree? Yeah, McCrory Cup, etc. The county want them. They're into minor panels, and who knows, maybe into a county senior panel by the end of May as well. Yeah, because of the bright young thing. So some of this stuff. 2003, right? And I still say a lot of this is still the worms in the can, yeah? 9 years later, all right? So beware of that debate. And I don't know, we will come to some sort of answer at the end of it. Question is, are players are bullied by coaches and teachers to make decisions regarding commitment? you know. Another type of bullying, putting pressure, emotional pressure on people. Oh, come on, look at all we've done for you, you know. And all of this, who helped you, all of those sorts of things. Is it right, is it wrong? Well, you need to be careful with it. I think it's very interesting. I spend a lot of my time over the years, when I think about it, either talking to players about the relationship with their coaches, or talking to players about these multiple commitments in their life and how they manage those. And in some ways, players are actually under emotional pressure because they feel they're letting people down all the time. Yeah? So in some ways, it's taking the enjoyment even out of playing. And I think if you read newspaper interviews with county players as well recently, you'd figure out what sort of decision making went on. I'm interested in how players make transitions. Are we aware enough of the problems as they navigate through the different phases? So from secondary school into minor, into county football, under 21s and senior, and then maybe dropping out as well. You don't make the cut after 21, you don't make the breakthrough. And we a master's student did some research on accounting, and it was quite interesting. I'd like to develop it further. And I'm also looking at stuff in academies in England about that, about players being released. Is there a route back? Can the door be opened up again? You know, if you were in this excellence program with accounting, will they take you back, and will the coaches be always looking out for you? I think there's also aspects of people's development away from sport. So you've got somebody who's 16 or 17, what's going on in their life? Exams. Anything else?
Relationships.
Exactly, they're teenagers. You've got family, you've got your social network and so on. And at that age, actually it's really important, that social network. It's part of your identity, your comfortness, being a youth and so on. So, you know, are we flexible enough to understand in some ways there's life outside Gaelic games and maybe life after Gaelic games? And are we aware of the various influences at various stages? So when the child is really young, 4 and 5, who are the main influences on their life? Parents, yeah? Then they go into the educational system and teachers have more of an influence. Then they become more involved, maybe, let's say 10, 11, 12, in club sport. So the coaches have a bigger say in the development. And then when they've been getting to an excellence program, then again the coaches have still a say, and obviously the parents. In England, the school teachers would lose a bit of their, let's call it, their emphasis or role in that development, because the players sign for a club, and the club becomes the main organisation that provides the football development. Whereas in the Gaelic games, it's still not clear, is it? Because everybody's doing a bit correctly, so yeah. So it's not as clear cut. So we're still getting people moving through. The school teacher is going to be important, the club's going to be important, and the excellence coaches are going to be important. And I think maybe you're getting the idea now that we've used the word academy, but we're also on about a sport that leads to a professional career, and it's a different club structure and so on. Does that make sense? So the structure of Gaelic games and the end product for elite players is quite different than an academy in rugby or professional soccer. Alright? So probably have that at the back of your mind now, because that will give you a clue what either are ongoing problems or maybe some of the issues we've got to deal at the other end. In England, you know, a typical scenario would be somebody becomes an academy director, and you can see on the slide who are they normally, or used to be. Famous ex-players, yeah? And clubs thought, you know what, we get these people in because they're a draw. Parents love talking to so-and-so, and they bring their kid along because he's the academy director. What could be the downfall of having that approach?
Might be clueless.
Clueless. All they've done is played what we call elite, elite football, elite sport, and then went straight into elite sport again, without, as I say, spending time in the trenches as coaches. So they haven't worked with kids, grassroots, excellence program, etc. And just been, helicoptered in again to another elite performance program. And they've very little understanding of parents, schools, yeah? clubs. To be closeted in this professional game and elite world for so long. And I've come across one or two who haven't been much good, and then I've come across some who've been good. So be aware, don't fall into the famous ex-player trap, without offending anyone in the room. So we need continuity in staff and appropriate decision making. So if we commit to an academy or an excellence director, then we want to give them time, him or her, to work, rather than changing it every 2 or 3 years. Because you know what happens, they change the academy director, the next thing they bomb all the coaches, get a new batch in, and we're back to scratch, starting all over again. So go back a little bit, we need a philosophy, we need to be clear on what it is, and then we commit to doing it. Alright? Then without changing our personnel too often. Because there's a lack of continuity of ideas, and there's a lack of continuity in dealing with people as well. And likewise, if your coach is working in that environment, you want to get develop as a coach as well. 1 year in the centre of excellence somewhere, and then you lose it because the new academy director. That stunts your growth and development as a coach. So we gotta stick with the coaches, and we just gotta stick with the people, assuming we pick the right ones in the first place. All right. Parents. You know, traditional attitudes of parents, their problems. Don't get involved in them. Yeah? Try and move quickly as you get your balls out of the car. So you dodge them and then they'll get on the afterturf. Or are you going to be a bit different? So we engage with them. We need to tell them our expectations and plans for their child. It's the first time we use the word child, isn't it, so far? It's been very deliberate. We're dealing with kids under 18s. Yeah? Decide on the key topics. So we put on some workshops at Crystal Palace for them, and the same idea happens across sports, psychology, nutrition, and so on. But it's really important to buy into the philosophy. Now, have you ever had parents coaching from the touchline? Yeah. Okay. And they may be saying something the opposite of what you're saying, right? And the issue at Crystal Palace is the kids at 8 and 9, we're actually trying to get them to pass the ball out from the back into midfield, sixpence of football. That's the way we're going to go, because we want these talented individuals who play within a team. What do you think some of the parents are shouting at? Kick it, run, shout it! Yeah, that's the London term for giving a big whack. Yeah? Boot down the other end. Why are the parents shouting those things to their kids?
That's the way they learn.
The way they learn, and what else are they afraid of?
Want their kid to make a mistake.
Brilliant. Yeah? And obviously, if the kid keeps making mistakes, he won't get signed or kept on. And, you know, so what's all of a sudden, what, you know, we've got a kid in fear, yeah? The coaches are trying to allow the kids to make mistakes by possession game, and all of a sudden it's slightly being sabotaged a bit from the sideline. So engaging with parents to get them on board about the way we play is really important. Just other things as well, you know, parents are an incredibly important resource, and we need to understand their lives as well. This one here is, the kids do not drive cars to training. Why have I written that down?
The kids for the game.
Exactly, yeah, thank you. Yeah? So we can't blame kids for being late, because mom and dad are driving, or they're coming on buses, or whatever it is, you know, but we're going to have this. Yeah? We're also going to have kids who live in rural areas, which are great, and maybe quite a distance away from your centre of excellence. So getting kids and hoping that everything runs on time, we've got to be realistic. What's happening to the Irish economy at the moment, north and south? What's the pressure on parents? Money and work, shifts, and whatever's going, a lot of parents are doing it. There's a knock-on effect in volunteerism, within sport, but there's also going to be a knock-on effect where parents are going to struggle at times to get everybody in the right place at the right time. So again, we need to be sensible and understand where the parents are coming from as well. One of the things that's coming out is that to be an incredibly successful athlete, you need to be highly motivated. That hasn't changed, okay? But what's happened is this, there's a thing called deliberate play and deliberate practice. There's a guy called Ericsson, he said you need 10,000 hours, didn't he, for excellence, to become technically proficient. And that totally shapes the way academies and centres of excellence programs want to deal with kids, more contact time, etc. But the deliberate practice is very much around a structured coaching environment. Alright? Now, how different is that from the older people in my age in this room when we learned Gaelic games, what sort of environment did we learn Gaelic games in? Was there loads of qualified coaches? Was there loads of organised sessions with bibs? Did you go down the road and kick football with 3 or 4 year neighbours who were roughly the same age, and maybe it was I was 16 and you were 9, and you still all joined in, and then his sister also played, and yeah? Agreed? So we all learned the game in a very informal, fun environment and so on. It wasn't all high intensity, super organised, high intensity, etc. Yeah? So we're now going to get a generation of kids, and the same happened in England, that it's going to be an incredibly structured environment that they're being sent into. Alright? And as I said to you, I think that's going to affect their motivation. And the players getting sour with the game, you know, they're falling in love with it, as they say. This is bloody hard work. I've got to be in there, I don't get time, I'm on the run straight after school and so on. You know, kids sleeping in cars on the way to training and all sorts. That's all happened in London. Crystal Palace then changed the time of their academy sessions. So what they did was, normally what had happened is the younger ones would train first, and the older ones, and then some kids would be getting on the AstroTurf at 7:30. By the time they finished at 8:30, 8:45, change, go home. What time do you get home to get home doing homework? Too late. Yeah, should be in bed. So they put all the sessions early running at the same times. Now that was a logistical nightmare because you maybe had to have a bigger facility or hire more facilities. But they actually figured out that they wanted everybody finished by around 7. And then they were going to get home at a sensible time. Does that make a lot of sense? Yeah? The timing of that, is it good enough that we can get them there from school? And then is it good enough that we can get them home, fed, bit of homework, and go to bed and sleep? All those common essentials. Yeah? Rather than kids stuck in cars at 9:30 at night coming home from some training session. So that's really important. Task and ego. Some kids are very task driven. You say, look, practice this skill, improve it for me, off you go. Other kids are more worried about how they look in front of the group and are they the best player in the squad and so on. Best player in the club. So, how do you manage it? And one of the ways you might manage it is your values as a coach. Watch coaches on the touchline, right? Think about the following. Their team get the ball and score a goal, 2 or 3 goals on the sideline. What often happens to some coaches? I'll give you a clue. Who's my top man? Who's the best for it? Okay, I can't remember. What coach is overreacting? Give me some of the coaches who overreact.
Neil Lennon used to, I think he's calmed down.
Calm down, yeah? And, you know, and you do this, and they're all going crazy, and then they do a Marino down the line, and he's, yeah? And of course he's Marino and he can get away with it, but it doesn't really work for the rest of us. What are you maybe emphasising by the way you cheer and you feedback on the team's performance on the touchline? Passion. Okay, next bit. Somebody does a really good bit of excellent technical skills and passes the ball, and some coaches are quite unmoved.